There we go. And so Jenny, over to you to kick us off here. And thank you everybody for joining us this morning. Looking forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. Let's get our screen going here. So as Craig said, welcome to everybody this morning. We will head to Menti in just a moment, but as always, it's super important to us and to SAIT to just take a moment to recognize and acknowledge that SAIT's campus here in Calgary, and where many of us are living, is situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Today, that encompasses our Indigenous people from the Treaty 7 region. That is the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. SAIT also acknowledges all of the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. We know that all of you are not necessarily in Calgary with us. Alberta covers Treaty 6, 7, and 8, but wherever you are, be Canada or further abroad, thank you for taking a moment to connect to the land where you're situated. For us here, this is a traditional land and a place where we all walk in the footprints of our Métis people. We'll just stop sharing this one. And as promised, we'll bring the Menti up. And for those who've never seen Menti in action before, that should help you to get in. So menti.com on your cell phone or that second browser if you like. Once you're there, pop the code in 61312165. And lots of people have done that down the bottom. You can tap the heart, tap the thumbs up. You don't have to do either. I'm going to move this slide. There we go. We've got quite a few coming in now. I'll move the slide on so that you can see what happens with Menti, and it gives you a chance just to say hello one more time. So there on your phone, you should get the choice of how was your week? Pick one, you hit submit. There we go. Somebody's had a week, me too. Good week, glad it's Friday. There we go. We didn't have living the dream in there this time. Often we pop that one. I'm actually glad to see it. So nobody's picking a horrible question for a horrible week. One of the joys of Menti, just in case you're wondering or you choose to use it in your organization, it is absolutely anonymous. We have no way of even knowing who's in here, let alone what your answers are. So as we move through the next few questions, feel free just to use it as a moment of, and that self-reflection piece as well. I'm just gonna give a second here to let some more people come in. And I think the good weeks are winning. A few fantastics out there and a few TGIFs, as we used to say.
It's always a bell curve, isn't
it? Oh no.
Always a bell curve.
Bell curves, quadrants, or boxes.
Yeah.
That's life. All right, we're getting up there now. So if you are having any trouble, your phone might send you to Mentimeter. You want to be on menti.com. Pop in that code one more time, 61312165. Your screen probably looks like this. And then at the bottom, there would be a submit button where you can send it in. We've got just about 100 people in here, so close enough for us to move on, I think.
Yep.
So we're talking today, our sort of aim, and we'll come back to this, is to zoom in on that intelligence, as we like to refer to them as psychological safety. It's its own thing, but we add that intelligence just because it fits the rest of our program. And one part of psychological safety is learner safety. That's where we're sort of intending to focus this morning. So the first question asks you, when you last learned something significantly new at work? And what we're really looking at here is how often are we learning whilst we're on the job? Haven't quite got the bell curve yet this time, Craig. Lots of people learning lots yesterday. That's kind of the world that we are living in at the moment, for sure. Lots last week, few last month. Some hanging out there in the, it's been a long time since I had to learn to do something new. And in fact, when we think back 2020, we all learned a lot in 2020, that's for sure. This is a good question. If you're joining us here as a leader, it's a good question for your team. Beginning of a meeting, check in. Are we learning as we're on the go? And then let's take a look at our next one. So this ties to it. Sometimes when we're learning, it doesn't always go well. Sometimes when we're learning, it actually goes horribly wrong. We hit that failure, or we're wrong, or we're incorrect in a way. And how does that sit for you? How comfortable is it for you to be wrong at work? Remember, Menti is anonymous. If you fall, we've got just one person hanging out on that. It's not. We're talking there about both levels. Feel free, be honest. We're just tracking numbers, setting the scene for our conversation today. It's quite reassuring to see none on the never ever. That just shows that we are starting to shift in this space. And only 18, there's well over 100 of us in here, 19, 20, who are not quite sure what all the fuss is about. Interesting how we have a personal level attached to this. So my boss is okay if I get it wrong, I don't like it.
I wonder how much that is tied to the fear of appearing wrong in front of others.
Absolutely. That's a huge part of what we're going to talk about today. Okay, and we'll shift on. I think we've just about got as many as we would.
Yeah.
So now when we're talking about promoting learning, some of these are killers. If you want to squash learning in your team, department, organization world, these are the classic sayings that will halt people, stop them so quickly. And often we say it with good intent. There's a good piece for us. We, our intention is good. Okay, let's not be too overcomplicated here. Let's simple this out. But you just squished half my ideas if you say that to me. Somewhat demoralizing that that's the way we've always done it is still popping up there as the front runner.
Yeah.
And if ever there was a killer, that first one, well, that'll never work here. Okay.
Yeah.
Just to give
Carrie,
a couple
you're absolutely right, Carrie. So that just in the chat, Carrie's put a comment in here about not worried about appearing wrong in front of others. I just have high expectations for myself, which is fantastic, right?
Yeah.
We're often our own worst critics, aren't we? Or our own hardest critics, I should say.
Maybe both.
Interesting comment here from Tanya. I tell people at the interview stage that I challenge anyone who says we do something because that's the way we've always done it. I encourage them to do the same. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. So last one.
It's okay, Tanya. Just struggling with the typing this morning. It's all good.
Friday. Yeah, Friday and it's early. It's all good. We'll move to the last one. We'll keep this up for a little bit, but this one will stay open as well. So if you want to type more later, you can do. And, pure curiosity, if my slide will change. There we go. What does it mean when we say fail fast? This is one of those terms. We have lots of those terms out there at the moment that we use really sort of flamboyantly, and we use them often. But what does that mean? What does it mean to fail fast? Does it have a meaning to you? I love that. The first one, no idea. Fail fast, learn fast, like that. And there's me saying we use it lots and somebody's never heard it. Fair enough. If somebody gave you permission to fail fast, what would that look like? Interesting, no chance of success.
Nike has made an appearance. Just do it.
Don't dwell on it. Like this, do it, recover, learn, and move on.
Another interesting, jump the gun. That's it. It's interesting. Iterate quickly.
Yeah, if a process doesn't work, better to find out fast that it doesn't work.
Absolutely.
True. There are lots and lots in here. So what we'll do is we'll leave this slide open. I'm going to drop it off my screen, but it will stay open. Feel free to contribute to it. And we can, by virtue of Menti, save these as a PDF. And when Craig sends his follow-up email out, we can attach those to there for those of you who are interested in all the different versions of how this sounds, how this appears to people. I'm just going to stop the Menti. So it's still open. Feel free to add to it. And Craig, what I thought I'd do, just to start with, for those who didn't join us the first time we're talking about psychological safety, is just give that quick overview of where this learning fits in, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. No, I think that's good.
So let's get ourselves up there. Psychological safety has been around for a long time. It's defined in many different ways. The two sort of favorite, for want of a better expression, thought leaders are Amy Edmondson, and the other one who sort of really emerged on the scene last year, Dr. Timothy Clark, who describes psychological safety as an environment of rewarded vulnerability. If ever you are going to be vulnerable, is when we're learning, when we're making mistakes, and when we're failing as well. So psychological safety, if we take those two people at its simplest level, is made up of 4 levels. That's Tim Clark's work. At a basic level, we have inclusion safety, which is where basically we say, you're in. If you're human and you're harmless, you're in. That's the inclusion piece. And once we've got inclusion safety in place, people will feel safe. They'll be prepared to show up and take part in that learning safety. Learning is about growth. It's about being able to make mistakes without fear of retribution of any kind. And that whole entire learning from each other, learning on the job, as well as the traditional learning that we would encounter. The next one in his levels of safety is that contributor safety. This is the one that people earn and often comes as a result of learning safety. This gives us the autonomy. Craig, you and I have talked lots about adults showing up to do the job that they've chosen to do and that they're paid to do. Contributor safety allows us to have that contribution. And then the pinnacle, what we're really all aiming for, is that challenger safety. Can we challenge the status quo? If the terms career suicide, career limiting move exist in your organization, in your team, in your department, you don't have challenger safety just yet. Underneath there, these are the 3 that came from Amy Edmondson. So what she recognized is that in order to get these in place, there are 3 pieces that we can do to help ourselves. Set the scene, set your terms of engagement, create space for voice, have everybody contributing, and then that productive response is a make it or break it piece within all 4 levels, but I would suggest quite heavily in learner safety too. Okay, there we go. Scene is set.
There we go. Excellent. So when we talk about learner safety then, Jenny, are we talking just about training or teaching somebody? All right, because I think about this and I go, okay, this is good. If we create a psychologically safe space for people to feel comfortable, to fail, to admit mistakes, what if you have a leader who just isn't a good teacher, right? Is this all about your leader being a teacher?
No, it helps. But the pressure, here we are again, the pressure isn't all on the leader. So there's so many different ways that we can learn. So if you're sitting there thinking, yep, that's me, I'm a rubbish teacher, I don't have the patience, I don't have the time, but you have a team, then become a facilitator of learning. Set up the opportunities for your team to learn. And that's as simple as a piece on your agenda, like we did this morning. What have you learned? What have you learned in the past week? What have you learned recently? How can we increase those learning moments? I worked with a leader recently, and she had her entire team learn from each other. So at the beginning of a 6-month period, they decided something that they wanted to be able to do or understand that was within that team's function. And then within 6 months, she said, you guys can make the time, and they all did, to train each other. It's simply brilliant, because now when somebody's away, they've got all that cross-training in place. They all learned on the job, and they're all richer for it. So it doesn't have to come from you as a teacher.
Interesting. Yeah, and creating that environment where your colleagues can lean on each other and teach you. is it's somewhat tied in with collaboration, right? And this whole concept. And I remember, it was 2-3 years ago, collaboration was all over the cover of Harvard Business Review and so on. And, everybody's going to collaborate. And it became this buzzword of, we're all going to work together. But was it really the buzzword for just, perceived buy-in or creating that false sense of buy-in, right? But when we sort of do this, one of the things that I think about is, if we are talking about learning new skills, learning new mental models, learning new ways to adapt to business, and the last 20 months has given us all a crash course in this. The big piece that we've talked about too, or we touched on in the topic, is how do we unlearn what we did before to be able to move forward, right? And that, I think that for me, when I think about this, is always the biggest hang up in terms of, we talk about, we've got to change, we've got to learn a new way to do business, but the gravity of how we've always done it keeps pulling us back, and nobody wants to be the one to step out, right? And so how do you tie those two pieces together? Or actually maybe don't tie them together. Maybe how do you cut the ties between those two pieces?
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So we like to be comfortable. So the way we've always done it is the comfortable way to do it. And it's probably quick and it's probably easy. So that's why we keep gravitating back there. And we can do it. So then we don't have to be wrong, or it doesn't have to go wrong. How do we unlearn? There's a huge piece on that curiosity. And it's actually, I think the kindness in it nowadays is a patient curiosity. And 2020 really hit the fast forward button on all of us. It was just such a rush to because we had to, it was survival. But now everybody's exhausted or tired of doing that. So let's put a little bit of patience back in there. But I think that patient curiosity is really healthy. What could we do better? How could this be different? Or if we need it to be, let's approach it with the curiosity. And the minute you approach it with a curiosity, you're kinder on yourself. And I'm laughing because I'm remembering how fascinating from last week. But you look at something, you're like, well, that's interesting. And then you begin to question it slightly different. What if? What if this? What if that? So that patient curiosity asks us to unlearn. It asks us to look at it. Those of you who have looked at Adam Grant's new work, the book is called Think Again, I believe. Yeah. Here's a brilliant analogy in there, and how we show up. I think it's a politician, a preacher, and a persecutor. And his request is actually think like a scientist, because the scientists aren't ever done. They're constantly looking at it, rethinking, relearning about, and they're prepared to be wrong. They have a hypothesis and they're prepared to be wrong. How do we do that in the workplace? We have to create that space. Here's where the psychological safety comes in. How do we make it comfortable to get uncomfortable? And that's pretty turbulent, and that's a difficult place to hang out. And the piece for leaders here especially is, we're tired of being in turbulence. We're change exhausted generally. So it's creating that conversation. We're looking forwards. This could be better. And how together, there's your collaboration. That's going to require different perspectives. Do we make it better?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the leadership piece of this too is important. Rick's got a really good comment in here in the chat about the signal to unlearn has to come from the top.
Yes.
Right. If your senior leadership is not going to be willing to unlearn themselves, how much are you going to step out and be the one to challenge the status quo? Some may do it. Again, everything's a bell curve, right? There'll be somebody out in the corner that's willing to do it. Ron's got a question in here to everybody in the chat. And how do you differentiate between safe environment to challenge and the need to follow orders, i.e. top-down management, for example, like the military? I think my one take on that is some of the piece in military, and again, I'm not a military person, but I think some of those become life or death situations. But the question is a really good one, right? So there is top down, and then there's how do how do you challenge top down within the construct, right?
So there's a couple of things within there. I mean, first off, if the psychological safety is not there, if it's career suicide, then you're constantly doing a risk assessment, an internal risk assessment. If I say this to you, am I going to stand the chance of losing my job, losing out on promotion, being excluded? As humans, we hate that. Even if you're an introvert, we don't like to be excluded. That's a risk assessment that we'll make. So that's one piece that's going on there. And as that sort of senior level, if they're not willing to unlearn, they're not willing to change, they don't see the need. We've all seen it, especially if you're on LinkedIn at the moment. There's this shift going on. People are making choices based on those kind of decisions.
Yeah.
But the other piece that's in there, and you and I chuckled about this the other day a little bit, is what kind of failures, what kind of challenges are we talking about? And I believe it was Amy Edmondson who said there's basically three kinds of failures, was how she termed them. There's the preventative ones. These are the ones that we've made this mistake before, like 3 or 4 times before. This is not a failure that we want to promote, or this is a different conversation. The first time we make it and we're learning, fantastic. But not when we've made it 4 times in a row for exactly the same reason. I believe the second one was complex, and that's when we have no control over the conditions and the conditions are affecting what's happening. And then that third one, this is important. This is she refers to them as intelligent failures. And so these are the pieces that have the potential to make a difference. Those are the ones that you want to promote, and you want to promote them when they're going to be of benefit to your team, your department, your organization. And it's interesting too, when we talk about promoting, we've changed the language from challenge. That's a different language construct, which might make it a different conversation, especially if we approach with that curiosity.
Yeah. So you triggered a couple things for me. When curiosity, we hadn't planned this, but I want to just kind of dive in on this one a little bit.
All right.
Can you teach people to be curious, or do you have to be naturally curious? Can you teach curiosity? I'm curious. I'd love to see the comments in the chat around this one, because for me, I don't know, maybe I'm a pessimist on human nature around that. My thought is you're probably either curious or you're not by nature. So I
think, okay, we'll see what the chat says. The book of Jenny, this is not scientifically validated. So everybody who has the research, send it in. I'll definitely take a look at it. I would suggest that we have people who are innately curious, just comes to them. That's their nature. But I would suggest that a lot of that comes from the modeling that they had some part within their story. So if I think back to, I wasn't particularly curious. In the last 10 years, I would say, yes, I have learned to be far more curious. And I will, that what if, yes, and actually the sentence that sticks in my head a lot, especially when I'm working by myself and trying to look at something, is there has to be a different way. And so when I look at, talk about learning, unlearning, when I look at how we used to teach, okay, and in fact, the classroom, you guys can't see it, but it is rows of seats like this. Like I have an allergic reaction to rows of seats in a classroom. That goes way, way back to my old life. And so there has to be a different way. Yes, we've switched it. Then no longer do you need a sage on the stage. You need someone who can navigate that conversation. How do we make it possible for everybody to talk? How do we build from the wisdom in the room to get that full benefit from the time that we have together? It's a classic. If we're not curious about that, all right, we'll tip up and we'll read page 22 and then we'll answer the question.
Yeah.
So I think you can. I think you just have to practice it. And it helps if you're someone who's modeling it.
And I think it also probably is heavily tied to how much you care about, or how much you're interested in about what it is you're trying to understand. So I know you can't see the chat, Jenny. There's lots of things going on here, but we've got the bell curve again. We've got, you cannot teach curiosity, plain and simple. I think it can be taught to a degree. Well, I saw my name on this one, so I'm going to single it out. Thanks, Simon. I'm with Craig. I think you're either curious or you're not. It's funny. We all like our own names, don't we? let's see, if you learn how to ask questions, or you can teach how to ask questions, encouraging it might relate to an individual's confidence. This is an interesting comment. You can't teach it, but it can be developed by the individual. I like that.
Okay. Yeah, I would run with that.
Yeah.
No, I like that.
Lisa
I'm just
Gibson. Sorry.
I was just going to catch on that question piece as well. We mentioned earlier that productive response, and we talked about the role of the leader. And so one of the ways to build curiosity within your team maybe is in your response when somebody does ask a question. And so if you've got that question at the table, and sometimes in there, safe people say, well, this might be the dumb question. But let that question come, and how you respond to that is absolutely crucial. Because if you, excuse me, if you squash that question, and let's be fair, okay, there are some dumb questions, but if you squash that question, there's not, then that person is unlikely to ask questions again. You're killing that curiosity. But if you encourage that question, then we start to build that curiosity too. So yeah, maybe.
Yeah, interesting. Sorry, folks, I just want to call out a couple of resources folks have pointed to here as well. Carol talking about Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies.
Yep.
And Ian talking about, I'm not even going to attempt that name, Genrich Altschuler, and put a link in there. The largest study of human creativity. Interesting. I'm going to check that out. Tom, I really like this comment, Tom. It's about teaching a process, like asking questions, and especially not jumping to conclusions. Rafaela backs that up with about, not making assumptions, right? And so I think that's a really important one. And Mary Beth, I saw a comment here. Oh, it isn't just about questions. It can be about wondering or musing as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Interesting. And yes, you've struck a chord as well. There are dumb questions, Jenny. You are right. You've got some people agreeing with you there. So thank you. I've always wondered this one's, and I've heard this concept discussed in sales leadership, right? Because so much of selling is being able to uncover needs, ask good questions, be genuinely curious about the client that you're working with. And if you don't have that ability to be curious, can you actually succeed in the role? Just to put a bow on this, there was an interesting article from Harvard Business Review. I'll see if I can find it to put out with the notes. It was talking about unlearning. And again, it touched on this specifically about replacing cleverness with curiosity.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought that was a really interesting way of looking at it, right? Because generally, yes, you want to be clever and you want to be right in a situation, but learning to just block that and really truly be curious. I go back to an example we talked about in an earlier conversation, and I wonder if this works here, Jenny, where your exercise of giving people cards to play the devil's advocate, right? And is there the ability? I think that is actually a tool that could work in this situation if you're trying to take a new approach to something. Thoughts? I don't know.
The other one, it would, yes. And the other one that just sprung to mind, I don't know whose it was, but it's an old but good one, is that empty chair in the meeting. And the empty chair represents the client or represents the department on the other side of the organization that this will impact. And just once you have it there, that visual, if you're face to face, how would you do that if you're virtual? There'll be a way, but is how do you bring that person into the conversation even when they're not there? And so you have to sort of question what that would look like. And when in that design thinking process, that's the empathy piece, is how does that hit that end person? So that might be another piece within there, is that empty chair technique as well.
Yeah, and another story, two other really interesting comments here. Lauren making the point that the only silly question is the one that isn't asked. And absolutely, right? If you're thinking it, odds are, as Ron adds on here afterwards, there's somebody else thinking it as well. Yeah. Don't be afraid to ask the question. So to come back, you talked a little bit about, should we just let everything go, right? and you went through the preventative, complex, intelligent. Uh, what if you're trying to move forward? And this might be a really simple question. I think the answer is going to be somewhat obvious. But what if you got folks who just aren't getting it, right? What do you do when the silly mistakes go from being annoying to being an annoying?
Okay, well, there's a couple of pieces. The first one, I always go to this too. So if it's always been, excuse me, if it's always been you, let's say they're learning something, okay, and it's always been you that's been helping them to learn that, and the same thing keeps happening, and you've been presenting it in the same way every time. You got to look this way first. What am I missing that they're not getting? I think that's always a piece we have to check in with as well. The other piece in there is how I think actually it's how we divide our labor. So if the same person is struggling with the same thing every single time and they're just not getting it, are we, I don't know what the expression is. I'm going to say beating a dead horse, but that doesn't sound right. I'm not sure what the expression is, but there's a disconnect in there. So actually it's not a simple answer at all, because the difficult question is, where's the disconnect? And this is where that psychological safety comes in, because if we just ignore it and drop them and push them someone out without taking that on board, then we're not going to trust to help them learn something else again. So immediately we're pushing that person out from our team, and that's going to do nothing for team dynamics, for that person, for you as a leader.
Right.
So having that conversation early and dealing with what that piece might be. And I think, how long do you let it happen before it becomes annoying? That's another piece in there. And if we're talking about learning and we're encouraging that conversation, hopefully we would catch it before it gets to that point of all the little symbols annoying.
Yes. Colleen makes it, and I think the word you might have been looking for, Jenny, Colleen makes a really good point in here that not everyone can do everything. Sometimes people are misemployed.
Yes. Yeah, right? There we go. Absolutely. And two, we employ people for the job role or the job description, and they're super qualified for 2/3 of it and brilliant. And we still insist that they complete that other third. And so I love it when I see organizations or teams that take all of the tasks and say, right, where do our strengths sit? Who will take what? And I know the first thing about selling, but if I was really, really good at cold calls and getting that first connection, let's say that's the thing, then why aren't I doing that if I like it? Why do I have to do the other stuff when there's probably someone else who's very good at putting the presentation together or whatever that piece might be? And so I love it. I like that. Misemployed. Can we change the task? If the person's good, they're fit for the culture, the chemistry's good, do they have to stay within their box?
There's the job description, Jenny.
Don't get me started. That's a conversation for another day.
Right, but no, I think that's a very real barrier. Like, I love where you're going there, and I appreciate it. And I think, to your point, I think more organizations are moving in that direction, where you actually take the talent that you have and say, okay, how can we make sure we are getting the best out of everybody?
Brilliant.
Inevitably, there are going to be some things that some people just don't want to do. And that becomes very different in trying to adjust for that than if they can't do it, right?
Yeah, but if we so if you do that, everything that people want to do and they're working from their strengths, now 70% of my job, I'm working from my strengths, so I feel good, I feel empowered, all that great engagement and all those pieces going on. There's still going to be those swamp tasks, the pieces that nobody likes to do. So why don't we distribute those and take them on? So your 30%, your swamp tasks for this week or this month or this quarter, whatever are these.
Yeah.
And because they're ugly, nobody likes doing them. They're always at the bottom of the thing. We'll change them up, and we'll switch that one, and you'll get that variety piece.
Interesting. No, I like that. I like that. Ron had a question in here, and I think it's a bit of a question, probably a statement too, about how many times have we seen or heard somebody trying to get their message across by repeating the same message, just louder. right? And that's, again, it goes back to the whole repeating the same activity, expecting to get a different result. And
Yes.
that's the piece I think you need to be careful of as you're going forward and watching your team. Like the biggest thing for me is if it's not working, change your approach.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
100%. If something is not working, change your darn approach and move forward. So, sorry, I'm just scanning the comments here.
While you're doing that,
Please.
lots of you will have heard me say this before, but Mark Goldstone is my favorite quote: "Be more interested than you are interesting." And so when you're pushing the same thing, you're working really hard on it. You're being the interesting one. So as you say, you start, be interested. Why isn't this working? What's going on here? Why isn't this connecting? I'm missing something.
Yeah. So as a leader, then, how do you start building this in? Right. So if you, and for me, there's always, I always think there's a good step to take is to say, listen, we are going to be intentional about trying something different. Right. I think you need to set that expectation versus surprising your team with it. That's not quite the right word, but be intentional. Like come back when you come back from a conference, say, hey, I learned ABC. I want to try ABC. Yeah. But how do you start building this in? If you've got a group where you need to start changing your approach, you need to do things differently. How do we go about this? How do we help them learn and unlearn on the job?
There's lots, and as always, we've slides hiding in the background. Those of you here will get those slides, so you'll see this bulleted on a slide. Don't worry about trying to catch it, but I'll try and pick out my more favorite ideas. And I think you nailed one of them. Is it needs to be intentional. This is work again, so it's got to be a priority. And one of the pieces within there, if you're a leader and you're bringing this in, what are the conditions that you're providing or that you're setting up? So if we like people to learn, but we're working at the pace of that whirlwind and there's no time to learn and we're under pressure to learn and we have to know it by tomorrow, that's really hard work. In fact, I'm going to suggest that may not even work. So are you providing the conditions to allow people to learn? The other piece, well, two things, I think. One, share and celebrate. So somebody goes to a conference, they learn something, give them the power, the resources to share their learning and report back on that learning. And then if it works, let's just take a moment. And celebration, it doesn't have to be cake. It just that moment to really recognize that they went out of their way and this worked, and that's worthy of a celebration on a team level, individual level, whatever the preference may be. And then the other piece is make it part of the conversation. And so classically, we always, let's say we were involved in something and they call it a post-mortem, which is just awful. But, we look back and everything that went wrong and all the rest. Well, why are we doing that at the end? Start at the beginning. And let's have that conversation. What could go wrong? What are we likely to face here? What are the obstacles? What might we learn? And then don't wait till the end. Have a mid-mortem. I'm not sure there could even be such a thing, but I wrote it down, so now it counts. So have that one in the middle as well. And then have one at the end. And maybe that one at the end actually becomes more of a very cool conversation because that's the compilation of everything that we've learned.
100%, and it actually informs the next pre-mortem, right?
Yes.
Right? Although some folks may worry about throwing karma out to the cosmic gods, and if you have that pre-mortem worried about what could happen, actually manifesting it, but that's a different conversation. I'm just joking. So Tim's got a really interesting point here about I think it's important to take ownership if I'm not understood. I would ask, and this is a great question, what part am I not explaining clearly? It may be their fault, but positioning it on myself removes barriers in the conversation and makes for a much more open conversation. I think the key in that is how you ask that question.
It is.
The tone in that question, the approach, I love it, right? Yeah. Help me understand how to help you. Help me help you, right? Let's go back to Jerry Maguire. But I love that. I think that's a really interesting one. Frankie, we will get recordings sent out. I know some people are dropping off here. Ron with another comment, had great success building a high performance team with 2 simple steps. 1, setting clear objectives. 2, sorry, and it's moving as I'm reading this, asking the team to tell me what was keeping them from achieving their objectives so I could get those road. Absolutely. Right? This is exactly it as a leader, 100%. Show me the money. You're right, Rick. So Jenny, I know we're coming up on 8:42 here. I'm just thinking, best practices around this? Any best practices we should think about as leaders going into this?
It's funny. It's funny that you say that, because one of the things that stuck with me in Adam Grant's work was, let's talk about better practices. Because when we talk about best practices in that we've learned, we've done, that's closed. This is it. Whereas if we suggest we have better practices, then we've always got that opportunity to think again. And then when I look at the work we do, we're constantly looking for better practices. So that's kind of well, there's one in the chat there. I just caught it, came across my screen, leading practices. I like that too. That works as well. Yes. So we have a couple of strategies. We'll talk about those in a second. I think the biggest piece is embracing the feed forward and the feedback, and setting up the conditions. That's the place that we have to start. And from there, then you've got those opportunities to run a thought experiment. A thought experiment there's not much risk in there. Just broach the conversation. What would you think if? And that's the way to start small and build it from there. From the sounds of things, it says on my screen, there's over 100 comments in the chat. This is already happening to a large degree. So now we are looking at better practices. How do we build that concept of learning? Really ties to what we were talking about last week with the adaptability. We know we need it. It's not going to slow down. We're going to have to keep adapting. That's going to require us to keep learning something and then unlearning it again, and then learning something different and building on there. And then the other, I think the key in there is sharing that information. You just said it when we were talking about the mortems. When you finish one, share sounds like a family. Share that learning so that nobody else has to go through as much work to learn that piece again.
Absolutely. Cool. So I think we're right on time here to wrap up, but can we finish off with our big idea and 2 strategies and 3 questions?
So I'm going to trust my slide deck here. Oof, it worked first time. Excellent. There we go. So our big idea.
Sorry, good comment there, Rick, as well. Thank you for that. Sorry, carry on, Jenny.
I will take a look later. So our big idea, this is comes from the work of Ben Zander some time ago, but I love this. I have it on a Post-it note on my desk. We constantly in our past world have created expectations that people have to live up to. And that provides a ceiling and that provides a dead end. And what if we start talking about possibilities to live into? That opens everything up and allows us to learn, to create, to innovate, to collaborate. So I'll leave that one with you to stew on that one. 2 things that you could take away from today and use. I can't remember where this came from, but who's your truth team? Because when we're talking about learning, when we're talking about growing, we need someone, or we need I think Adam Grant refers to them as generous critics. Who are the people that will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear? That's your support squad. There's a place for them. We love them. But if we want to elevate work, we need people who will be genuinely honest with us, challenge us in that space for the sake of the work. And so that's where that trust piece comes in, because there's no personal friction. There's no sort of piece within there. I just need these people to help me elevate the work I'm doing. So know who your truth team are. Who can you go to and say, I need some feedback on this, and grow in that learning space. The second one is increasing those learning moments. And actually, I didn't mention this one, but where can you be a rookie? The photo is our son. He's a rookie this year at UNB playing basketball and learning. His message to me the other week, I have so much to learn, Mum. And you're great. But where can we be a rookie? Where can we start again? And where can we play in that space and be safe to learn as we go? Maybe that's within your team. Maybe it's learning what somebody on the other side of the business does as well. So we can keep this kind of safe and close and in-house, or we can go right out there and learn again. The agenda moments I did mention earlier, pop it on your agenda, make it part of your culture as you're meeting together. And then our last one, as always, 3 questions. Take a peek, step outside the box, be a little bit objective in there. What's happening with failure? Are those productive responses in place? They're key. Are your learning plans personal and individual? That's another really big piece. Care about them enough to have a conversation. Where would you like to go? What do you need to learn? And then where could you get uncomfortable? Where could you think again and just challenge that piece? And maybe it's that thought experiment line where it's just a conversation, but pick somebody who will see it differently than you and lean in and see how that goes and then build from there.
Perfect. Thank you. And we are back next week. I just threw the comment in the chat if you'd like to register for next week's session. Jenny and I will be here with Doug Jr. And Doug has been a huge contributor to our digital programming here at SAIT and digital leadership especially. And so we're looking forward to a very interesting conversation around digital leadership. As always, if you'd like to dive in further on any of this, chat with me about how SAIT can help you and your team. I'm welcome. I welcome the conversation. Other than that, have a fantastic day. Have a great weekend, and hope to see everybody again next week. Thank you. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.